Social Security survivor benefits are one of the most misunderstood aspects of Social Security. And because of that, I've received hundreds of questions about them. And so in today's video, we're going to walk through and try to answer, hopefully once and for all, what you can expect, the different nuances that might apply in your situation, and give you a crash course on survivor benefits that will hopefully keep you from having to watch 16 other YouTube videos. There are a lot of culprits for the confusion around survivor benefits, and most commonly they come around remarriage timing, split filing strategies, understanding the actual amount that you're eligible for. Does your benefit and the survivor benefit get stacked, or are they independent? There's just so much confusion around these things, as well as the widow's limit. There's a lot to understand, and I'm going to attempt to make that as simple as I can without also watering it down so much that this isn't actually helpful. So bear with me. There will be details and things maybe that don't apply to you, but for this to be comprehensive and hopefully make sure you're not missing anything, you're going to want to make sure you watch the full video and don't assume that you know something, because there's probably something in here that you didn't know about. And given the nature of survivor benefits, it can be a really sensitive topic. Obviously, some of you may just be thinking ahead and planning ahead, but many of you have also probably lost someone recently or expect to soon. And I just want to express my condolences. I understand how difficult that can be, and I hope that this video is helpful in making this a little bit more understandable and simple so that you can focus on the things that really matter and working through the grief of losing someone. So what exactly are survivor benefits? Survivor benefits are benefits paid to the survivor of a person who was entitled to Social Security. These benefits are paid to surviving spouses, surviving ex-spouses, surviving children, and even potentially dependent parents. One thing that trips people up all the time is they get confused, and I just want to clarify this up front. You do not get the survivor benefit on top of your own benefit. You will only ever get the higher of the benefits. So if there's multiple benefits at play, you're not going to get both of them stacked up on top of each other. Instead, what you'll do is you'll get the higher of those two benefits. And if that happens to be the survivor benefit, then you will get the survivor benefit. If it happens to be your personal individual retirement benefit, then you'll receive your benefit. But you will never receive both. It's also worth noting that Social Security pays a lump sum distribution, or an LSDP. This amount is $255, and it's paid to the surviving spouse or surviving children if they were eligible and entitled to benefits on their record in the month of their death. If you don't fall into those two categories, then you're not going to be eligible for this benefit. If you do fall into one of those categories, keep in mind this is not an automatic thing, and you only have 2 years to apply for the benefit, so make sure that you don't wait, because if you do, it will be gone, and it will be gone forever. And there's some other things to know about that. If there's multiple children, the benefit does get split between them. And so we're talking about $255, not multiples of that if there are multiple children. So if you want to get your $255 payment, you do have to apply for it. It is not something that happens automatically. Now, obviously, that amount seems quite small, and the reason for that is it has not been indexed to inflation. It was capped in 1954 and has remained there ever since. And so it's a token amount, and I know it can be laughable for some, but for others, it may actually be a meaningful sum of money that can be really helpful in paying for the expense that comes with losing someone. Now, before we get into the mechanics of the benefit itself and some of the nuances around the calculation, let's take a second and walk through who actually qualifies for survivor benefits. As I mentioned earlier, the broad categories are spouse, ex-spouse, children, or dependent parents. Let's walk through spouses first. The first thing to consider is your length of marriage. So with every Social Security benefit, there are what's called the length of marriage rules. And for different benefits, you have to have been married for different lengths of time. And for survivor benefits for spouses, it's 9 months. Now, there are always exceptions. And in this case, if it was an accidental death or they're caring for a joint child that you had in common, or perhaps there's a disability involved, then it's very likely that the length of marriage rules could be waived, but those are unique considerations that you'll want to ask the Social Security office about. For ex-spouses, you need to have been married for at least 10 years. You must not have remarried before the age of 60. But if you are remarried before the age of 60 and then that marriage ends, whether by divorce or death, then your eligibility for survivor benefits could be restored. It's just going to depend on the specific situation. But as long as you're not remarried currently, then survivor benefits may be in play for you. And it's probably worth noting at this point in the video that all of the ages being used and referenced here are in reference to somebody who's not disabled. If you are disabled, a lot of these ages will change. For instance, in this situation, when talking about the remarriage before age 60, for a disabled person, it would be remarriage before age 50. And so just keep that in mind as you listen to the video. These ages may not apply if you're talking and dealing with a disability situation. So one more time, the remarriage rules are: if you remarry before the age of 60 or 50 if you're disabled, you are not eligible for a survivor benefit. If your remarriage occurred at or after age 60, then your survivor benefits are unaffected. And moving on, we have dependent child benefits. The age thresholds for receiving a dependent child benefit are that you be under age 18 or 19 and 2 months if you're still in high school. And as usual, if you're disabled, you're subject to a different rule. And so as long as you were disabled before the age of 22, then you would be eligible for a dependent child benefit on the deceased person's Social Security record. And this question comes up all the time, so it's worth mentioning that this applies to children of all types. This could be biological, adopted, step, or even a dependent grandchild of the deceased worker. And in addition to the age thresholds, they must also not be remarried in order to be eligible for survivor benefits, although there are some exceptions where benefits may still be paid. And the final category are dependent parents. So as long as they were age 62 or older and were also dependent on you for at least 50% of their financial support, they may also be eligible for a dependent parent benefit. So with the broad categories out there, before we look into all of the specific amounts for the different types of benefits, let's just take a moment to focus specifically on spousal survivor benefits. So in the case of a surviving spouse or ex-spouse, assuming you meet all of the eligibility, then you may be eligible to file as early as age 60 for your survivor benefit. This differs from your individual retirement benefit as well as the normal spousal benefit when both people are still alive. In both of those cases, the earliest you can get a benefit is actually at age 62. So you'll notice that you're able to get a benefit 2 years earlier when we're talking about survivor benefits specifically. You'll also notice that the age-based reductions are different, and so you can't just take what you know about individual benefits or spousal benefits and apply that to survivor benefits. They're subject to multiple different considerations, and we'll take a look at those now. Now, as I mentioned, you can get the survivor benefit as a spouse as early as age 60. However, if you are caring for a child, you'll be able to get a different benefit. This is sometimes called the mother or father's benefit or the child and care benefit. And basically what this would be is you would get 75% of the primary insurance amount, so the amount at full retirement age for the deceased worker. You'd be eligible to get that amount for taking care of a child under age 16 that you had in common with the deceased worker. And so there could be some scenarios where if somebody passed away, you would be eligible for this benefit for a period of time, but then whenever the child ages out and is age 16 or older, then you would no longer receive the benefit and it would go away until you would be eligible for your own survivor benefit as a spouse at age 60. And another thing that's different is the full retirement age for survivor benefits. And so I'm going to show up here on the screen. There's actually two distinct schedules. There's one for survivor benefits and there's one for all other benefits. So individual retirement benefits on your own record, spousal benefits, etc. And so what you need to do is distinguish between these two and understand that your eligibility for the spousal benefit and how it'll be reduced will be based on the full retirement age that's listed on the left-hand side of the image that you're seeing on the screen now. This is the schedule specific to survivor benefits. So make sure that you're using the right one so that you don't miscalculate the amount that you're going to receive. So if you're familiar with full retirement age, you'll know that it changed from 65 to 66 and then from 66 to 67, and that happened over a number of years. The key distinction between these two different schedules here is basically that they're 2 years offset. So instead of starting in 1955 for every other regular benefit, your individual benefit, spousal, etc., and working its way up to 67 2 months at a time, it actually begins in 1957 for survivor benefits. And so it's just 2 years behind the regular schedule. Now, before we get into specific numbers, it's important that you understand if you are really eligible. And keep in mind, eligibility is based on obviously a lot of things that have to do with you, but it also depends on the deceased person's working record and whether or not they were what's called fully insured or currently insured. This is going to have ramifications on the types of benefits that are actually available on their record. And so I'm going to put that on the screen, and rather than walk through all of that, you can actually read it directly from the Social Security Administration themselves and see whether or not they were fully insured. Okay, so at this point, you understand whether or not the deceased person was currently or fully insured, and you also know the eligibility of yourself or the person in question based on their records. It's at this point that we can start considering the actual amount or the percentage of their benefit that you might be eligible to receive. So at a high level, the spouse or ex-spouse could be eligible for up to 100% of the deceased person's amount, depending and adjusted based on your own filing age. So if you take it earlier than full retirement age based on the survivor benefit schedule, then it will be reduced accordingly. If you take it at full retirement age, then you could get the higher of your own benefit or 100% of this benefit. Remember, you can't stack the two, you get one or the other. And this is based on your survivor full retirement age, which is that separate schedule that's different than your individual full retirement age. So you could receive between 71.5% all the way up to 100% of the deceased worker's benefit. It's important to note that the 28.5% is the maximum reduction down to that 71.5% number. That's the most it can be reduced. And depending on your full retirement age, if it happens to be different than 67, you would have to do a different calculation to figure out what the monthly reduction should be per month to take you from the full all the way down to that 71.5% number. So far, we've been talking about the percentage that you'll be eligible to collect. But of course, what really matters is how many dollars you're going to be eligible to collect. And so to understand the dollar amount of the deceased person that your percentage will be based on, we need to really divide this up into two different camps. So on one hand, let's look at if the deceased person had not yet filed for their Social Security benefit. So if they died without filing and it was before their full retirement age, the Social Security Administration quite graciously assumes and treats it as if the person had reached their full retirement age, even though they didn't. Of course, the survivor benefit will still be reduced based on your filing age if it's prior to your own full retirement age for survivor benefits. So if the deceased person passed away and they had not yet filed for Social Security, but they were actually past their full retirement age, then the Social Security Administration will add in the 2/3 of 1% delayed retirement credits that they would have earned and were accruing for their own benefit. They will actually apply that, and that will be factored into the calculation, meaning that you will get a benefit as a survivor based on that higher amount, which does include the delayed retirement credits. Now, on the other hand, let's assume that the individual did file for Social Security. If the deceased worker did file for their own benefit and they did so prior to full retirement age, then it's likely that your benefit will be lower. But thankfully, the Social Security Administration has something that is often referred to as the widow's limit or the RIB limit. And this basically ensures that you get either the higher of 82.5% of their full retirement age primary insurance amount, so their PIA, or the amount that they were actually receiving. So this prevents you as a widow from getting basically gypped if your spouse took it as soon as they could and then died really soon after. Then that could leave you with a much smaller benefit. And instead, you'll get the higher of either the 82.5% of their PIA and or what they were actually receiving, whichever one happens to be more. And keep in mind that is still adjusted by your own filing age based on your survivor benefit full retirement age. If they are deceased and they did file, but they did so after their full retirement age, then you would be able to collect based on that higher amount which had accrued the delayed retirement credits. Essentially meaning that you get the unadjusted amount, you get the amount that they were actually receiving. It's not based on the lower primary insurance amount, but you actually get what they were getting, including those delayed retirement credits, which is quite a nice thing. And as always, if you file before your full retirement age for survivor benefits, it will be adjusted accordingly. So there's sort of two layers going on at all times, really. There's the way that they're determining the amount that the survivor benefit is based on, and then your own percentage that you receive of that dollar amount is going to be a function of when you file. So as a quick recap, you can get 71.5% up to 100% of the survivor benefit, but that survivor benefit is based on and dependent upon when the deceased person or the deceased worker filed and whether or not that was before their full retirement age or after. And so all of that's going to determine the amount of the survivor benefit, and then the amount that you get will be based on when you file. Okay, so that was spouse and ex-spouse benefits. Now let's take a look at dependent child benefits. So for a dependent child, again, refer back to the earlier part of the video where we talked about eligibility, but assuming you are an eligible child, then you would be eligible for up to 75% And of course, if there's multiple children, then multiple children might be eligible for a survivor benefit. But as you stack multiple benefits, it's very possible, especially if there's a surviving spouse and multiple children, that you may hit and be governed by the family maximum. And that just means that it's going to reduce the benefit available and limit the total amount that could be collected on the deceased person's record and keep that within that 150 to 180% range. And so it'll depend on the combination and types of benefits being collected, but that's the sort of range that you can expect to receive overall, excluding ex-spouses. They don't count in this unless there's a child in care with the ex-spouse. And that's the only situation that I'm aware of where it does get factored into this. And speaking of an ex-spouse taking care of a child, if that's the situation, then they would be eligible for 75% as well. Now, what about surviving dependent parents? For a single surviving dependent parent, they can get up to 82.5%. For both surviving dependent parents, they'd be eligible for up to 75% each. And of course, always governed by the family maximum. And to recap all of that a little more simply and with a visual, I'm going to put this up on the screen, and this walks through basically every benefit type and the expected percentage that you could receive as a survivor benefit. And so, of course, some of these are ranges. There's even specific age ranges for disabled people versus non-disabled. And so you can get a lay of the land and see quickly what type of benefit and what percentage you might be eligible for. And then, of course, you need to layer in all of your own unique considerations, because when you file and if you meet all of those are going to be outside of the scope of what I can explain in today's video. So let's look at some strategic claiming options. One of the really neat things about survivor benefits is that since they function separately, you can actually choose and make strategic choices about when to begin either the survivor benefit or your own benefit, meaning that the timing and which one you choose to file and apply for can actually have a real impact in getting more money and maximizing your total income from Social Security. For example, let's assume that your own PIA or your amount that you'll receive at full retirement age is $1,000 per month. And then let's assume that the survivor benefit is also $1,000 a month. Well, one option that you would have is that you could actually begin taking the survivor benefit at the earliest age possible at age 60. Now, remember, you can't take your own benefit until age 62. So this gets you access 2 years earlier. And while you would have that full 28.5% reduction, meaning that you would be getting $715 per month instead of the $1,000 that the survivor benefit could have been if you took it at full retirement age, you would be getting it for 2 additional years rather than waiting to take it at a later time or take your own benefit. And then this is where it gets really cool. You can actually take the survivor benefit at age 60, get the $715 per month, and then have that continue all the way through until age 70. And then you could switch to your own benefit. The reason this is so cool is that your own benefit is able to actually continue growing. So not only does it get to continue up to the 100% of your own primary insurance amount at full retirement age, but it also collects and accrues delayed retirement credits. This means that by waiting, you could actually let your own benefit grow from $1,000 up to that 124% of your PIA, which would be $1,240 in this case. And so effectively, you really want to be thoughtful and do some additional calculations if you are eligible for both benefits, because there's likely going to be a strategic filing decision that would yield a better outcome for you, of course, depending on your goals. And of course, this would work in reverse as well. So you could do the opposite. You could actually take your own benefit at the earliest age possible at age 62 and have it reduced down to 70%, and then later switch to the survivor benefit. And again, it just depends on your personal circumstances, the disparity and the difference between the survivor benefit and your own benefit, and how bad you need the income is always a factor as well. And so depending on all of those things, choosing when to file can really be an important thing, and you should give additional thought and consideration to how to file and get the most income possible. And whenever you're making your strategic filing decisions, it's also important to remember that if you're under full retirement age and you're still working, then you will be subject to the earnings test. And basically, the earnings test just looks at how much you're making, and if it's over certain thresholds, then they withhold a certain amount of your Social Security benefits. So with all that information, if you're ready to apply, how do you actually do that? Well, surprisingly, not online. Although many things are online, and that's what is usually encouraged. For survivor benefits, you'll need to either call or visit your local Social Security office because they don't actually have an online application for survivor benefits specifically. And if you're already receiving Social Security spousal benefits, then all you need to do is call and notify them, and then they can switch you to the survivor benefit. If you were simply receiving your own benefit or no benefit at all, then you'll actually need to make a choice about which benefit, in which case you need to consider everything we just discussed and make the best strategic choice to maximize your income. Well, I hope you found the video helpful and that it helps you to avoid making any rash decisions, especially if you're dealing with a split filing situation. Now you know some of the nuances as well as some of the strategies that could benefit you and actually lead to getting more income over your lifetime from Social Security. If you did enjoy the video, please hit like and subscribe. That really helps my channel, and it signals to YouTube that they should show it to more people just like yourself. If you have any questions at all, please leave them in the comments below, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.